If there is one thing that can make or break a relationship, it is self-esteem. Self-esteem of both people involved in the relationship, not just one. But sometimes if you have one person with healthy self-esteem, then there's a better chance of it actually making things work. But first we need to understand what self-esteem is about, right? And I've covered this a number of times before, but because it's such an important foundational issue, we have to understand what we mean when we say self-esteem so that we can have something to connect with, something tangible, something meaningful. Self-esteem, in my simplistic way of putting it across so that we don't get lost in the psychobabble, is how we feel about ourselves, but not how we feel about what we are and where we're at, how we feel about ourselves. What we think about who we are and what value it is that we have within us and that others see in us. That is what self-esteem is all about. And the healthier it is, not the higher it is, the healthier it is, the more grounded, the more measured, the more meaningful our connection is with that, the less likely we are to be a significant contributor towards dysfunction and problems in a relationship. So, first a disclaimer, because a lot of people get tripped up on this. When I describe why someone is behaving a certain way, it in no way is intended to condone or justify or defend their behavior, or to make it seem as if we must accept them for that and the responsibility for dealing with it then becomes whoever else is dealing with them. That is not at all the case. The whole point of creating understanding about these issues, about mental health, about how people operate, about how we experience life, is so that we can be more effective in our response in trying to deal with, overcome, or even thrive in those spaces. Now, if we don't look at it from that perspective, then that already is an indicator of a low self-esteem. Because a low self-esteem, the biggest, most telling sign of a low self-esteem is when you're preemptively defensive. Preemptively. It means that you defend yourself before someone even attacks you. And you also see attacks where there aren't any attacks. So you see people having issue with you, or you see people trying to put you down or make you look bad or undermining you, even though that isn't their motive. So a low self-esteem is a result of, or should I say defensiveness results from a low self-esteem, because you work with the assumption, with the belief, not the assumption, the belief in your mind that they won't respect who you are. And because they won't respect who you are, you have to protect yourself from how it is that they're going to disrespect you. And that's how we end up showing up in spaces where we already look for all the problems and we have a problem for every solution. That's the sign of a low self-esteem. So what improves our self-esteem? Our self-esteem is improved by how we view ourselves relative to what we've experienced in life. So if we become defined by life, if we believe that what happened to us is a reflection of our worth, what happened to us is what it is that determines whether we have a right to happiness or a right to opportunities and a right to having a good, wholesome, happy relationship. If we look at it that way, then that's an indicator of low self-esteem. Because we are allowing life or circumstances to define who we are, we don't have the belief that who we are can influence and shape how we want that to turn out. Or at least if we can't influence something that has already happened, where we're dealing with the consequences of it, we assume that because it happened and the consequences are X, that means X is going to be true for the rest of our life. That's where we lose ourselves. We lose ourselves to believing that we are powerless. And when we believe that we are powerless to change the things that are important to us, we automatically go into defense mode because we don't want to allow things to get worse. So we have to protect ourselves. We have to prevent people from taking us for granted the way someone else took us for granted. And we have to prevent people from treating us badly because we're tired of people treating us badly and all of that. And what we don't realize is that when you become preemptively defensive, and I need to emphasize it's preemptively, And when I say preemptively, just to be clear, it means that before something happens, you assume what is going to happen. So when you become preemptively defensive, you create a whole lot of problems, right? One of which is you become the oppressor that you think you're protecting yourself from. Because you're assuming that someone who is completely innocent may be attacking you, but you don't realize that they might just have their own needs. They might just have their own insecurities, their own demons, and they have their own requirement that they need you to fulfill, or they need you to do something for them that makes them feel significant. But you're so busy protecting yourself from feeling insignificant that you don't realize that that behavior causes someone else that's important to you, that you're important to, causes them to feel insignificant. And then when they come out fighting, because they also have a low self-esteem, then you fight in return, and you guys then try to determine who is going to prevail, because neither one wants to be the victim. Neither one wants to be oppressed or subdued or prevented from being happy and all of those things. And that's what happens, is that the preemptiveness, that preempting what's going to happen next, it comes from internal conversation. That internal conversation is what you've got as a narrative, as a dialogue in your head about what you think is going on around you, what you think others think of you, what you think life is going to throw at you, what you think the future holds. And all of that overthinking loses the present moment, which means that you're not seeing what is happening in front of you. You're looking specifically for indicators that you can interpret as evidence that what you think is going to happen is actually happening. And that's how we create a self-fulfilling prophecy. We look for everything that convinces us that what we think is true is actually true. Everything that doesn't meet that criteria, that doesn't answer that problem we're trying to solve about what's going to happen next, everything that we preempting that doesn't meet it, we ignore it. So someone could be smiling at us, but just because they might have been distracted in a split second and they lost eye contact, we'll assume they're being insincere. We'll assume that they're trying to play us. And we won't consider why it is that they might have done that. And it's a silly little example, but it's those very subtle nuances, those hints, those little tiny pieces of evidence that we are painstakingly looking for, because we believe that it's true. We believe that there's no way that someone like that is going to respect us. So if they're not going to respect us, we're going to make sure that we're going to put them in their place. So the more important thing that I want to focus on in today's discussion is how does this show up in different kinds of relationships? How does a low self-esteem show up in a partner relationship where you've got a significant other, a spouse? And what happens there is that the kind of expectations and responsibilities you place on each other about how you feel just goes through the roof. And if your expectation from your partner provokes their demons of their insecurities about their feelings of being insignificant or inadequate, then what you need is going to push them away. It's not going to draw them closer. And the more you explain what you need from them, the more they withdraw, the more they pull away. And that looks like, oh, so you really don't want to. It's not that they don't want to, it's that you're making it extremely uncomfortable for them to even try. Not because you're doing something wrong specifically, but because you don't realize what impact you have on them. You don't realize what it is that they are insecure about. And sometimes our insecurities are so deep-seated that our coping mechanisms through life have convinced us that we're not insecure. And that's where our misplaced confidence gets in the way of our self-esteem. Because then we focus on our proficiency, on our ability to deal with things in a specific way that makes us seem capable and makes us seem admirable and accomplished and so capable, that we assume that when we're capable, that means we're in a good space. No, you're not. That's confidence. Confidence is not self-esteem. Confidence is how well you can do something. Self-esteem is about how adaptable you are when what you can do doesn't work out the way you want it to. And hopefully that difference is something that you'll keep in the back of your mind as we go through these scenarios that I want to present to you. about how self-esteem destroys good relationships, or sometimes how self-esteem can take a bad relationship and turn into an amazing one. It all depends on what you bring to the table. And if you don't know what you bring to the table, if you don't know what you're contributing, then your self-awareness is not where it needs to be. And if your self-awareness is not in a good space, it means that your self-esteem is very, very, very likely to be low. Because you're more defined by what it is that's happening around you rather than what it is that you want to create in front of you. So what do you want to create versus what do you have to do? What do you want to contribute towards rather than what do you have to fulfill as a responsibility, as a right, as an expectation? So let's look at it in different relationships. So in the parenting relationship, a low self-esteem looks like a parent who is trying to control, who is excessively fixated on discipline, who is fear-driven in the decisions that they make, and who is constantly stressing and anxious about what it is that the future holds for their children. Now, because their focus is on their children, and because they believe that they've got good reason to feel that way, because look at the state of the world, right? Now, 100%, if you focus from that perspective, you're being defined by the state of the world. You're not contributing towards changing the state of the world. Now, before you tell me that you're just a single person or a single individual, not a single person, because a single person could mean something else. But before you tell me that you're alone or just you and your partner maybe, how are you going to change what the world is about? Remember that society is a sum total of its individual contributors and participants, right? The members of society. You're a member of society. What you accept and tolerate and what you surrender to being, this is the social norm, so we have to. You effectively giving weight, giving merit to that social norm that you believe is bad. But because you feel powerless, because you assume that you can't do anything to change it, low self-esteem, you will not try to change it. You will not even try to raise your children to be aware of what's wrong with it. You'll just raise them to be aware of what they need to do to make sure that they can prevail or they can be successful despite that. The moment you're defined by what you're afraid of, you're giving what you're afraid of more power than what it is that you have the ability to change it. And you don't have to change it by attacking it directly. You just have to create an alternative. So, for example, if there's a social norm that says that you must know your place and do as you're told and comply with expectations and all of that, and you raise your child to understand that, yes, there's a way to navigate that so that you don't go and create new problems for yourself, but you're not confined to having to operate in that space only. You can create a whole lot of things for yourself in this space while you recognize, respect, and treat with sensitivity what other people believe is important. Immediately, you created a bridge between the way things are to the way things should be. But you won't see it that way if you're in defense mode. So as a parent, if you find yourself excessively controlling, if you find yourself constantly reminding your children about what you've been through to give them the life that they've got and all of those things, if that is what you're always focused on, your self-esteem is taking a beating, and your self-esteem is what you think of yourself relative to what you think they appreciate about you or respect about you. And because of that, you are going to be overbearing to them, which is going to push them away, and then you're going to feel as if they don't appreciate you because it's like, look at this. I sacrificed my whole life and I did all of these things for you, and look how you people treat me. We cannot always be accountable for what our children take from our role as their parents. But we can be aware of what we're contributing towards what they're taking from it, so that worst case, we don't give them more reason to believe that they're right about what they're wrong about. I'll say that again. We mustn't, if we're aware, if we have a healthy self-esteem, we'll realize that at some point our children are going to make up their own minds. Because their reality is not just what they experience with us. Their reality is what they experience with us, plus the global village of idiots that are out on social media telling them how it is that we're wrong. And that's what we need to understand, is that if we don't realize what other alternate influences they are exposed to and what they see merit in and what influences they believe have credibility, we won't be able to have healthy discussions with them about that. So as parents, if you are oblivious to all of these things because you think, this is, young people's things. So why must you get involved? Yeah, no, you have to get involved. You have to have an understanding of what it is that your children are facing and dealing with and navigating in life if you hope to be a source of good counsel, of good advice and guidance and wisdom for them to figure out how they must navigate that with a values-based approach to life. And that reminds me, one of the most critical aspects of a healthy self-esteem is that you actively and consciously hold yourself accountable for the values and principles that you claim to live up to. So you don't make excuses when you do something wrong. You recognize you did it wrong, you understand why you did it wrong, you apologize for it, and you make up for the consequences of what you did wrong. That's a healthy self-esteem, because you're holding yourself to the same standard that you hold others to. But if you make excuses for yourself while you are rigid with others because they don't understand and they don't have this and they're not dealing with that, then you are looking for a defense so that they don't think less of you. And that's a low self-esteem. And some of you are probably going to switch off by now already, or just going to be upset with me by the time we're done with this. But we need to own this. We need to own the fact that how we feel about ourselves is the biggest contributor towards a successful life or an unsuccessful one. So how does this affect the child then? I've said before already, and there's a lot of evidence to prove both anecdotal and otherwise, to confirm that a child establishes their sense of self, their self-esteem, their self-worth, their belief in their capability. They establish that from their relationship with their father. Because the father is the problem solver, the mother is the nurturer, right? So if you are confident about your ability to problem solve, you make yourself available into spaces that seem daunting for others. Not because you feel confident about your ability to deal in that space, but because you're confident about your ability to figure it out and then respond in a way that will be effective towards being successful in that space. And that's why the problem-solving kind of relationship that we have with our fathers plays such a big role in establishing our self-esteem. So what happens if the father is a good person but absent? Working long hours because he's providing for his family. Working overseas because there's no local job opportunities and his family is then getting the benefit of his income, but he's not the benefit of his presence and his wisdom. That's how, just one example of how it is that a good parent won't realize what it is that they are denying their children because of their absence. And the children might not realize what they're taking from the fact that even though their parent is not a bad person, not a bad human being or an irresponsible parent, but because they don't have a meaningful participation in each other's lives, automatically it prevents them from developing those competencies and capabilities and understandings that would inform and improve their self-esteem. So a child who has a low self-esteem is a child that will come across as problematic, ADHD. Yeah, I'm saying that deliberately in quotes and in a mocking tone because that's exactly what it is. We look at a child who is fear-based, who is filled with dread about being enough, about getting things right, about people caring about them and all of that. And then we see them scatterbrained and looking all over the place and not focusing. And we think, oh, there's a problem with their brain. We need to put them on some stupid drugs and we need to take them for therapy. No. They need emotional security. They need an emotional grounding point. And the absence of the father or the conflicting parenting styles of their parents, where the one establishes a boundary and the other one dismisses the boundary, etc., those sorts of conflicts, when you have that, children don't have a healthy grounding point as far as their emotional development is concerned. And then they start looking for gaps and they start looking for opportunity to be enough to avoid being rejected, to avoid being criticized and all of that. Or they'll won't care about any of that and they'll go and start provoking and bullying and doing all sorts of things that comes across as manipulative behavior and all of that. And all it is that they don't have a healthy grounding point emotionally. Medicating them is not going to change that. Medicating them is only going to suppress their ability to be able to express that fear that they have within them. Recognize the fears in your child and you'll recognize the source of their poor performance, their social issues that they might be having, their performance at school, in learning, in meeting development milestones, in their social anxiety and all of that. Just recognize their fears, understand the fears, help them to come to terms with it and to overcome it. But you won't be able to do that if, as a parent, you also share the same fears, because then you are going to get them to honor the fears that you have by making them believe that the world is a scary place, it's a dark place, it's a this place, it's a that place, and that's why they must be careful about who they interact with and where they make themselves available and how it is that they run their lives and all of that. A fear-based driven approach to life is never sustainable. It's never one that's going to be for healthy outcomes, and people who lead a fear-based approach to life have a high occurrence of chronic illnesses. So do yourself a favor and take stock of where your self-esteem is so that you understand what impact you're having on the people around you, both your partner and your children and even your extended family, your blood ties, people that count on you. Your self-esteem will contaminate or it will beautify and make wholesome those relationships and interactions. You'll either be a source of stress or you'll be a source of comfort for them. So that's the parent and child one, and the kind of relationship between partners, I think that talks too. What about if you're an educator or a school teacher? How does it come out in your behavior when you have a low self-esteem? You'll fixate more on compliance with protocol in the classroom than you will on understanding the emotional disposition of the child. You'll be defensive and offensive and cynical in your comments to your children or to your learners rather than actually taking the time to connect with them so that what they don't have in their emotional grounding at home, they might find it in the classroom. I'm not making you responsible for the parenting role. I'm saying that if you want to save yourself a lot of time and trouble and stress, it's a whole lot easier to connect with the emotional disposition of the child in front of you than it is to try to force that child to just comply regardless of how they feel about life or about themselves. And that's why you see more and more horrid videos coming out on social media where you get teachers or educators and learners that are getting violent with each other and getting completely disrespectful in things, because the antagonism is going to be raised every single time, because guess who has less cause for concern about consequences? It's not the teacher, it's the child, because they have less awareness of how life works. So if they don't realize the consequences of their actions and you keep contributing towards the antagonism that is escalating, automatically you're going to say, well, it was a problem child and we must rid them from society and send them into juvenile delinquency programs and all sorts of nonsense, while not realizing that child just has no reason to feel as if they're going to be accepted in society or in that social setting either. So that's what you need to be aware of when it comes to your self-esteem and how it is brought to bear in the classroom kind of environment or in any learning kind of environment, is that if your self-esteem is not high, if it's not in a solid space, you're going to be stressed about whether or not people are going to take you seriously. You're going to be stressed about whether or not the class is going to take you seriously, the learners. And when you do that, automatically you're going to rely on authority. Because in the absence of having influence, of being able to sway people to take us seriously or to take something that we think is important, to take that seriously, we'll rely on resources or power or authority or threats or consequences that we can impose on them to get them to think twice about going against what we ask them to. And that's why we have so many learners that emerge from school who have only absorbed a whole lot of facts and swatted a whole lot of information, but have no practical, genuine, meaningful connection with all of that so that they can actually apply it in the way they're trying to figure out life, or the way they're trying to navigate life, or what they want to do with their life even. So yeah, we need to seriously revisit the educator-learner dynamic and realize what kind of impact, emotional impact, before anything else, not educational impact, what emotional impact educators have on learners, so that they can realize that their self-esteem is their most important tool to be able to establish rapport with children who come from troubled backgrounds. So moving out of the public space, out of the public sector space and the educating space and that, let's look at how it plays out in corporate. Because corporate, I would argue, is a cesspool of low self-esteem individuals. And I know a lot of people will take offense to that, but I did my 25 years in the corporate space, public and private sector. So I'm not just saying this from being flippant or seeing reels on social media. The reason for corporate being a cesspool for it is because people who don't have a healthy grounding, which is the majority of people, and the evidence is there. I can go into that another day. But the majority of people don't have a healthy grounding about who they are, because most people are they have a job or they choose a career because of the fear of what would happen if they don't. If they're afraid that if they don't have a good job, they're not going to be able to create the life that they want, then their fear about having a good job is going to override who they are. So when they get a job, they're going to focus on everything they need to be successful in that job, in that corporate, in that structure, in that power structure. And that's how they then compromise who they are for what it is that they believe they have to do, because if they don't, there's going to be consequences. That's what a healthy self-esteem does. It causes you to blur the lines between who you are and what you stand for versus what you have to do because you have responsibilities. And that's why there's so much backstabbing in politics in the corporate space. That's why the ones who have the most adept way of dealing with politics and networking are the ones that make it further, rather than the ones who are competent and have merit in what it is that they bring to the table as value for the business. So in the corporate space, the reason why low self-esteem makes it possible for you to thrive is because the criteria to be successful, to be enough, to be celebrated and respected and admired, that criteria is clearly defined, because you have job functions, you have KPIs, key performance indicators, and there's also KRIs or KRAs. There's all sorts of these acronyms that the HR departments and the executive come up with to try and keep a handle on performance targets and all of that. And in all of that, what they do is they lose the trust and they lose the substance of the relationship that they have with people that are competent in what they do and passionate about what they do. So you kill the passion and you replace it with a fear of what would happen if you don't. So a low self-esteem in the corporate space will result in a lot of backhanded behavior, a lot of unethical behavior. It will result in people who, despite being incompetent, will demand to be taken seriously because they have authority and they can bring to bear consequences on you that you don't want. And that's how you end up with bad managers being presented as leaders. And that's one thing that also happens in a corporate that has a generally low self-esteem, is they don't understand the difference between a manager and a leader. And then they call the entire management team leadership team. It's so far from the truth, it's actually scary. And when you start confusing concepts like that, you know that your self-esteem is low. Because if your self-esteem is high, you will be focused on substance, you won't be focused on titles and posturing and positioning things in a certain way so that it will be respected and approved and celebrated and all of that. You'll be focused on what is the value you contribute. And that value that you contribute, how does it resonate with what's important to you as a human, as a person, as an individual, as a competent participant in a specific technical domain? All of those things come into play. But if you don't have that sense of self because you're looking to be enough and you're looking to be celebrated and you're looking for the next promotion, regardless of how it is that it asks you to conduct yourself with people who are looking up to you and things like that, you'll forget about trust and you'll forget about commitments and you'll forget about your convictions, because you must just understand it's just business. So don't take it personally. That's a low self-esteem. So low self-esteem is at the core of unethical behavior, because you won't make yourself available to behave unethically if your respect for who you are is greater than the respect or the desire you have for what it is that you potentially would receive as rewards or incentives if you behaved unethically. That's what a self-esteem does. How does it play out in the religious space? In the religious space, a low self-esteem will result in people who preach fire and brimstone, who preach hell and heaven and punishment and reward. People who will condemn and who will label and who will justify their venomous outbursts and their venomous statements against other individuals purely because they believe that the religious scripts are on their side. When you have a low self-esteem, what you do becomes more important than who you are. Which means that if you have religious authority, you are going to use that religious authority to claim your space in society. Not because you are passionate and invested in the essence and the goodness and the wholesomeness of the religion or the spiritual teachings or whatever it is, but because it gives you an opportunity to earn respect and admiration and social standing. And that's when you'll end up with people who are oblivious to the wisdom of life, using religious scripture to try and dictate to people how they must live their life without understanding the basic concepts and context within which someone is struggling in life. So self-esteem in the religious space is critical. That's where you also get, unfortunately, a lot of the unethical and the abusive behaviors that come out in the religious space, where you get people who are in positions of authority in the religious space who abuse that authority to take advantage of weak and stressed out individuals who are vulnerable when they come to them for advice, and they then take advantage of them. All the scandals of sexual abuse and sodomy and all of those things that happens, and it's not just any one religion. There's one or two religions that might be more prominent above all the others, but I promise you, the extremist religionists are the ones with the lowest self-esteem, and they are the ones capable of the most abuse, the most harm. And that's why it doesn't matter which religious background you come from. If your self-esteem is low and what you get from your standing in religion bolsters or helps you to compensate for that low self-esteem, you are more likely to use religion to cause harm than someone who has a healthy self-esteem and connects with the essence and the substance of why it is that there's benefit and value in that religious teaching. So be careful of religious teachers and religionists who love to just spew gospel all the time, the gospel of their religion all the time, because they don't know how to connect with the human. And finally, political. What does a political leader with low self-esteem looks like? That's where you get the tyrants. The biggest tyrants are the ones who have the lowest self-worth. The ones who have the lowest self-worth, remember, the more access you have to power, authority, and resources to be able to compensate for your self-loathing, your low self-esteem, the more you're going to draw on that. The moment you feel under attack, the moment you feel challenged, the moment you feel as if someone is trying to undermine you, or you need to instill fear in someone's heart or in a certain populace because they need to take you seriously or else. And that's why you end up with atrocities. That's why you end up with war crimes and crimes against humanity and genocides. And you end up with all of these things because the people you entrusted your power in, those people are the scum of society. But because we have a low self-esteem, we respect and revere the office and the position that they hold more than we care about how they actually conduct themselves in that position. And that's why, with a low self-esteem, you end up with the biggest harms in society, which is racism, classism, elitism, all these isms. The moment you have an ism behind something, you've taken it too far, and that's because you become defined by that. Feminism and misogyny, it's not an ism, but you get the picture, right? You rely on your association with a certain demographic or a certain definition in society to compensate, to allow you to be relevant in a space that who you are would not be relevant. That's your belief of yourself. Your belief about whether or not who you are matters, and your need to be relevant in certain spaces without having the stature or the ability to influence in those spaces. And that's when we resort to unethical behaviors and underhanded behaviors, because if you don't respect who I am, you will respect what I can do. That's the cost of self-esteem, of a low self-esteem on society. You create tyrants, you create oppressors, and oppressors, I've always said and I will say it again, victims make the worst oppressors. Because victims, once they have ability and resource and capability and opportunity, they will ensure there's hell to pay for every single person that resembles their oppressor. And that's why you then end up with people who are defined by their blackness or their whiteness or their brownness. People who are defined by their Muslimness or their Christianness or their Jewishness. Because who I am isn't enough, so what I believe is what you're going to have to respect, because you must respect what my beliefs. You must respect where I come from. You must respect what I'm associated with. You must respect my rights. And that's why they say that when you get to the point of decline in any culture, any society, you'll find that they have the highest level of legislation for how it is that people must conduct themselves with each other. Why? Because when the basic fundamentals of respect, mutual respect and understanding, when that is eroded because of liberal ideologies, automatically what you end up with is an over-regulation of what people are compelled to respect, even though that they are required to respect is causing harm. Self-esteem is the biggest contributor towards what's good or what's bad or what's evil in this world. Because who we are will determine whether we're going to rage at the world or we're going to try to make it a better place. I hope that after listening to some of this, you would resolve to wanting to make it a better place. And you would be willing to recognize when your best intentions may have actually been contributing to negative outcomes that you didn't intend. And then you hold yourself accountable for that, because that improves your self-esteem. Your self-esteem is in a good space when you know you can sleep at night without overthinking things all the time. Your self-esteem is in a good place when you have a sense of peace and calm and composure about you, when no one is actually attacking you. When you can walk into a contentious situation and recognize that someone else's bad behavior is because of what they're feeling, not because of how it is that they're treating you. That's what a healthy self-esteem looks like. It's a healthy self-esteem. It's self-regulated. It's not dependent on how others treat you. And because it's self-regulated, because you can control it yourself, it means that you are mindful about who you are, what you stand for, hold yourself accountable for those values and principles and beliefs that you claim is important. You hold yourself accountable for that. And when you see how other people are behaving relative to what you would prefer, the most effort you'll put in is to make sure that you just prevent them from causing oppression or harm, rather than going overboard and becoming part of the cycle of harm and oppression. I'm Zaid Ismail. I hope that's a reason for pause and reflection for you, and that if you find yourself still focusing on taking everything that I discussed or everything that we always talk about in these episodes, if you find yourself taking it and projecting it on assessing and evaluating and judging and criticizing others, that's a low self-esteem. I know most people don't want to hear that. But when you're more focused on judging others rather than you are about taking stock for yourself and trying to understand based on your own internal compass and your own internal narrative, because you know how things affect you, you can then relate to how someone else might be behaving badly because of what might be affecting them. That's the beginning of empathy and compassion. Empathy and compassion is impossible with a low self-esteem. Even people who are involved in charitable endeavors, if they don't have a healthy self-esteem, they project their struggle on the victims that they're trying to assist, and they don't care about how that victim is actually receiving their efforts. They're only focused on whether or not that victim is going to be appreciative of their efforts. And the moment the victim outgrows that victim space that they're in, the person who is with a low self-esteem that's sacrificing themselves to uplift will feel as if they're taken for granted, and they'll grow bitter. So focus on your self-esteem. If there's one thing you can bring to bear on this world that will be a benefit and a blessing for it, is to make sure that you don't hold the world accountable for how you feel about yourself. Take care.